Idi Amin Dada was born in the small town of Koboko in northwestern Uganda, a land surrounded by forests and rivers that shaped his early years. He was born in the mid-1920s, although the exact year has long been debated, with records pointing to either 1923, 1924, or 1925. His father, a man of Kakwe ethnicity named Amin Dada, was a farmer who lived a life marked by tradition and simplicity. His mother, Asaat, came from the Lugbara people, and was known to be a healer who practiced herbal medicine. This mixed heritage gave Idi Amin roots in two different tribes of northern Uganda. As a child, he grew up in poverty, raised in a world of oral traditions, village elders, and the rhythm of rural African life. From his earliest years, Amin was known as a boy of unusual size and strength. He grew faster than his peers, towering over other children, with an imposing figure that demanded attention even in youth. He did not grow up with the comforts of formal education, and much of his childhood was spent helping in the fields, fishing in the rivers, and listening to stories told by elders around the fire. He learned discipline from the harsh environment that surrounded him, and his upbringing was deeply tied to both Islamic influences and traditional beliefs, for his mother converted to Islam and raised him under its values. This mixture of tribal roots, Islamic teachings, and the hard lessons of rural survival shaped the foundation of the man he would become. Idi Amin did not receive the type of schooling that would prepare a man for leadership in politics. He barely attended formal classes and his literacy was weak. As a result, when he grew into his teenage years, he found himself unfit for academic paths but physically powerful enough to seek a different road. He was recruited into the King's African Rifles, the colonial army under British control, during the 1940s. The British Empire often turned to the northern Ugandan tribes for soldiers, seeing in them toughness and loyalty. Amin's immense strength, his height of well over 6 feet, and his fearless nature impressed the officers. His lack of formal education mattered little in a world where discipline, endurance, and the ability to follow orders determined success. In the army, he learned how to march, how to handle weapons, and how to fight. He also learned the rigid hierarchy of command, and he thrived in this environment. The military became both his school and his family. He served in various campaigns, including the suppression of the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya, where his reputation for brutality began to surface. He quickly earned promotions, not through academic merit but through sheer physical presence and loyalty to his superiors. By the 1950s and 1960s, he had risen to become one of the most recognized Ugandan soldiers in the British colonial forces. The discipline of the army gave him confidence, but it also fed his growing ambitions. His life became centered around authority, the use of force, and the belief that power belonged to those who could seize and hold it by strength. When Uganda achieved independence in 1962, Idi Amin was already a commanding figure in the military. He allied himself with Milton Obote, the first Prime Minister and later President of Uganda. Obote saw in Amin both a loyal soldier and a tool through which he could control the armed forces. Amin climbed further in rank, becoming deputy commander of the army, and later commander. He was deeply involved in operations that brought him wealth, including the illegal sale of ivory and smuggling activities. His relationship with Obote was strong at first, but ambition knows little loyalty. As Obote began consolidating power and facing political challenges, Amin positioned himself as both an ally and a rival. In 1971, while Obote was attending a Commonwealth conference in Singapore, Amin seized his chance. Using the army, he staged a coup d'état and declared himself president of Uganda. Crowds in Kampala at first welcomed him with applause, seeing in him a man of the people, a soldier who had risen from poverty. Yet behind the smiles and the military parades was a hunger for power that would soon unfold in dark and violent ways. His rise to power was swift, but it was also rooted in deception, strength, and the knowledge that fear could move nations faster than promises. The years that followed were marked by some of the darkest chapters in African history. Idi Amin ruled with an iron fist, and his bad deeds became legendary across the world. He unleashed the army upon his people, creating a climate of fear. Dissidents were hunted down, arrested, tortured, and killed. The prisons of Uganda became chambers of horror, where thousands of men and women vanished, their bodies never found. It is estimated that between 300,000 and 500,000 Ugandans lost their lives during his rule. His paranoia grew, and anyone suspected of betrayal was eliminated. Entire tribes, such as the Akoli and Langi, were targeted, as Amin feared they might support Ovid or other rivals. One of his most infamous actions came in 1972, when he expelled nearly 60,000 Asians, mainly Indians, from Uganda. He accused them of sabotaging the economy and stealing Ugandan wealth. Their departure shattered trade and industry, and the economy collapsed. At the same time, Amin projected himself as a strongman on the world stage. He mocked world leaders, threatened neighboring countries, and even declared himself the conqueror of the British Empire. His cruelty was matched by eccentric displays, such as keeping crocodiles to which enemies were fed, and changing titles to glorify his name. His rule was drenched in blood and marked by chaos, a period where Ugandans lived under constant fear of the knock at the door that would end their lives. Yet even in the shadow of his atrocities, Idi Amin left behind a handful of actions that some considered good deeds. He presented himself as a champion of African pride, rejecting colonial influence and promoting indigenous culture. To some ordinary Ugandans, he appeared as a man who stood up to the West, unafraid of Britain or America. The expulsion of Asians, while economically disastrous, was celebrated by some Ugandans at the time who saw it as reclaiming their land and wealth, even though the result proved destructive. Amin also promoted sports, personally supporting boxing and encouraging athletes. His larger-than-life persona inspired fascination beyond Uganda, with some in the Muslim world viewing him as a defender of Islam after he converted the nation's calendar to follow Islamic observances. These acts did not erase his crimes, but they created a complex image, a brutal dictator who nevertheless wrapped his tyranny in symbols of nationalism, religion, and pride. For a brief moment in the eyes of some, he was not only a tyrant but also a man who dared to challenge the dominance of powerful nations. The fall of Idi Amin came as dramatically as his rise. By the late 1970s, his enemies were gathering strength. After he attempted to annex part of Tanzania, President Julius Nyerere of Tanzania launched a counterattack. Ugandan exiles joined the fight, and soon Amin's army began to crumble. In 1979, he was forced to flee Kampala as Tanzanian forces captured the capital. The man who once ruled with absolute power was now a fugitive. He sought refuge first in Libya, under Muammar Gaddafi, and later in Saudi Arabia, where the kingdom granted him asylum on the condition that he stayed away from politics. In exile, he lived quietly in Jeddah, surrounded by his family, protected but powerless. He faded into obscurity, no longer the feared dictator but a shadow of the giant he once was. He lived in exile for over 2 decades until his health began to fail. In 2003, Idi Amin died in Saudi Arabia from kidney failure. There was no state funeral in Uganda, no national mourning. His death was marked by silence, a silence that reflected the years of terror he had cast over his nation. To many, he remained the monster who destroyed Uganda. To a few, he was still remembered as a strong leader who dared to defy the West. His end was quiet, but his legacy remains one of blood, brutality, and the haunting reminder of how unchecked power can destroy a nation.